This podcast is sponsored by Communicate and Connect Counseling, where we have a team of therapists who provide individual, couples, and family therapy services, all tailored to meet the needs of military and veteran families. To learn more about our services, visit www.communicateandconnect.com. Welcome to the Communicate and Connect podcast for military relationships with your host, Elizabeth Polinsky, a military marriage counselor. If this is your first time listening to the Communicate and Connect podcast, please take a second to go rate, review, and subscribe to make sure you get all our future episodes. We also really want to know what it is you love about our podcast, and if for some reason you're not loving it, we want to know that too, because we're committed to providing the best quality content to help you improve your relationships. All right, welcome back to the Communicate and Connect podcast. This is episode 37 on treating your relationship like a business with Dr. Robin Buckley. I'm excited today to have Dr. Buckley here on the podcast. She is a couples coach, and this is the first coach that we've really had on the podcast to talk about how a coach might approach working with couples different than a marriage counselor. So, Robin, would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely, Liz. So that's a great question to start this off because it is a consistent one that I get in terms of what is the difference between going to couples therapy and going to couples coaching. And to start off, not a lot of people do couples coaching. It's a newer model. It's one that the framework I use certainly is one that I came up with. But to delineate the difference, couples therapy is going to look at clinical issues. So when a couple needs to do a deep dive into the past and things from the past that are influencing the relationship, certainly if there's any current or recent infidelity, addiction, abuse, or loss, that should be in couples therapy, because those are issues that are impacting a couple at a can be impacting a couple at a very dysfunctional level. That's true therapy. Couples coaching, very similar to any model of coaching, is talking about a preventative and proactive approach to creating a relationship the couple wants. So I start off very quickly with my couple saying, we're not going to talk about the past because we can't change the past. And if there aren't any of those clinical issues, there's no reason to talk about the past. What we can talk about is where you are now, what is working so we can build on those strengths to support what's not working, and then even more importantly, creating a plan for the future. So that's how I would in general differentiate between the two.
I'm glad that you're talking about that because I recently had a couple that was referred to me. So I'm a marriage counselor. I just didn't really tell you that beforehand, but I'm sure you probably knew.
I looked you up.
And yeah. And I recently had a couple that had worked with a coach, and the coach sent them to couples counseling because there was more stuff in the past. So that was actually my first time getting a referral from a coach. And I had really never had any of my previous clients work with a coach before. So it's just interesting.
I appreciate the coach did that because, as you and I both know, my background is traditional mental health and clinical psychology. And I was really hesitant for a long time to even call myself a coach, even though I went through a certified coaching program before it was really even an industry back in 2005. But there are so many people out there that call themselves coaches and have no ability to understand the brain behavior connection and truly be able to see when there is a clinical issue, and that should be a referral to a qualified therapist. And that's what scares me about coaching. And when I talk with people, whether they work with me or not, I at least work to educate them of what to look for, not only in therapy, but in coaching, and make sure you get someone who is trained and has a background to do what they say they're going to do.
Yeah. And so I'm imagining you might also be unique in the realm of coaching because you have a PhD in psychology. am I correct? It was clinical psychology too, right? So
Correct.
you have a lot of the knowledge and the background around mental health to be able to differentiate
Right.
what, I guess, when somebody needs something that's more therapy related. Um,
Correct.
but I'm
Yeah.
imagining there are other coaches who don't necessarily have that sort of experience.
No, there's not, unfortunately not. I do know some. I know some who have graduate degrees, whether masters or doctorates, and they're doing coaching. And some of them haven't been trained specifically as a coach, which I'm I'm a little uncomfortable with, but not much, because at least they have the background, and again, the brain behavior emotion connection, and
Mm,
can again identify when there's a clinical issue and it needs a referral, whether it's a couple in general to couples therapy, or one member of the couple or both who need individual therapy. So at least people who have that training and that background within psychology and mental health, I do think they have enough, absolutely enough education and skills to function as a coach. It's the people that have never had, I'm hoping with the goodness of their heart wants to help people, but they're like, oh, I did this, I went through this, so now I'm going to teach people. And I'm like, no, I wouldn't bring my car to a mechanic just because they own a car but had never been trained as a mechanic. And I certainly
yeah,
wouldn't go to a doctor who's like, well, I have a body, so I know what to do. And yet people approach
yeah,
coaching very much that way.
yeah. Okay. I didn't have this fully in mind when I was thinking about today's episode, and I know there's a lot we want to get into on like how you end up working with couples,
Mhm.
but how would somebody know if it's like a good coach to go to? Like, how would someone decide that?
Right. I first and foremost, I would ask what their background is, either in their undergraduate or graduate program, and if they've gone through a certified coaching program. And then if it was me or someone I love, I would go research what that program is, because there's a lot of like organizations that say they are coaching
Hmm.
train, training coaches, but it's very loose. So I would
Okay.
find one that is at least supported by the ICF, the International Coaching Federation. So it doesn't have to be that they have the actual initials. I don't think it's necessary to go the full way. I mean, I think that's great for some people, but at least something that's recognized by the one governing body of the coaching industry. And if they say, yes, I went through, my background is psychology, what does that mean? Does it mean you
Hmm.
just have your bachelor's, which really isn't going
It's
to
not the
do
same.
much for no? But if you have your master's degree or your doctorate degree in some area of psychology or mental health, then I think that's a secure place to start. So either
Okay.
absolutely has gone through a certified coaching program and or has a background in mental health or psychology. Those are the coaches that I admire and think that they really do great work.
Yeah, and who you would trust. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Mhm.
great. Well, thank you for explaining that. So, can you tell us a little bit about what brought you to coaching and couples coaching too? Because I have seen, I think when I have heard of coaching in the past, it's usually been like business coaches,
Mhm.
So,
Absolutely.
how did you come into couples coaching?
So what I always loved about helping individuals was those individuals who were coming in before there was a crisis. And as you know, in your work, a lot of times we do see a lot of those crisis interventions. But the individuals or couples that were like, we're just in a rut, or we're just not functioning the way we want to function. Those are the ones that they're motivated, they're not disillusioned already, and they are ready to make a change. So I didn't initially start out doing couples coaching because it's, like I said earlier, it's not really a thing. In fact, when people find, they're like, what
Okay.
does that mean, couples coaching? And so I was doing work as an executive coach with a lot of female executives, so C-suite power women. And when I would talk to them, very often, because I do think many women don't have that clear delineation between work and personal life. Like everything we do tends to
Mm-hmm.
enmesh and affect each other. So as we were talking about their careers and their professional plans, sometimes they would also talk about their family or their significant others. And what I found over time, Liz, was that these women who could go into a boardroom and manage a negotiation or go into a courtroom and deal with conflict, they didn't translate their skills and their strengths to their home life. So I'd say when
Mm-hmm.
they bring up their relationships, well, how do you manage conflict with your husband or your spouse? And they'd be like, oh, I don't know. We can't communicate. We can't do this. So I would flip them and say, okay, tell me how you do it at work. Like, how do you manage conflict on your team? How do you communicate with your peers? And these women could recite their strengths, their skills, how they do it, how they manage it. And then I bring them back again. Okay, so can you do that in your relationship? And they would shut down and they'd be like, no, that's different. And I
So
look at them like,
interesting.
well, why is it different? It's an interaction, it's a relationship. So I would work with them to start to see that there doesn't have to be that differentiation. You can still use those skills, maybe in with a slightly more personal way, but they can be applied. So as I did this work, very often they would start saying things like, could we do like a couples coaching? Is that a thing? And I had to wrap my brain. I'm like, I don't know. Is that a thing? Like, why couldn't I do that? I used to do couples therapy. So why couldn't I address it from the baseline of knowing how to manage interpersonal relationships in a setting, in a session, but from the coaching side? And so I started doing that. I make sure that whatever individual work I did with a woman was done, because I did retain that from my background. Like those are not going to be blurry. And then getting consent from the significant other or partner that it was okay, even though I had previously worked with, the typically the female in the relationship. And I started doing this work where we looked at their relationship like a business, and we applied all business principles around getting them to the level that they were satisfied and happy again.
I see what you mean about sort of the strengths-based and the sort of forward-looking, because even as you describe that, it just feels very different than what I do, like with the couples who come in. And that is really so interesting and fascinating that it was, I have this huge skill set at work, like I'm super successful, a total badass, and then I can't figure out,
right.
I'm stuck with how do I use the same skills in my relationship. So and you said you created your own model for this. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, and I'm still at the place of, I always feel myself hesitating when I want to call it a proprietary model, but my business coach said, Robin, have you found anybody else doing this? And I'm like, no, and I've looked. So this model is that, and as you know, Liz, like couples therapy can be very emotional and very painful. And a lot of times in our industries, emotions cloud strategic thinking, because we're reacting and we're not able to really get to that cognitive level of clarity sometimes in the middle of an emotional reaction, understandably. So with the coaching model, I worked and I used my background doing cognitive behavioral therapy to help people separate out the emotions from their thinking. And the way I do it is by reducing the emotionality simply at the very basic level in terms of words. So for example, we don't talk about problems or challenges in a relationship. We talk about pain points. And pain points is a specific business terminology that is just talking about what's challenging the company from achieving a goal. So a pain point in a relationship is what's challenging the relationship from being what you want it to be. So that's one, step back. We talk about collaterals instead of children or, parents that, anyone that you're doing the caretaking for. Because I don't know about you, but when I talk about my children, there is an emotional, like visceral reaction. Even if it's a good one, it's still visceral. But when we talk about collaterals, it just separates you a little bit more. So even from the basic words we use, it starts to develop the atmosphere and the culture that emotion right now doesn't have a place. Emotion has a place in your relationship, but right now we're talking about the business strategy of your relationship. And in those strategy sessions, we try and keep it as objective as possible, because again, in a business negotiation or a business meeting, you don't get emotional, because then you can't really tap into your professional skills that's going to make that, again, meeting or negotiation successful. So it starts from the basic level of words, and the whole framework is around a business plan for your relationship. So couples I use a Google Doc that couples get refreshed after every session. So they actually have a black and white business plan where they can look at the goals they've established, the KPIs that they've established to analyze their goals. I typically recommend, particularly when I start with a couple, weekly review sessions where they sit down with an agenda and go over whatever the things are that are coming up in the next week. Or we build in quarterly annual, or they're not annual, they're quarterly reviews, because in business, where it's absolute that you get an annual review to see how you're doing. But so few couples do that in their relationship. They just are like, yeah, it feels better. And I'm like, in business, we would never say it feels better. We want like data around that. So that's kind of the overview of how I do it.
Okay. That is just really cool. I'm just taking it in a little bit. I had read a book a long time ago called The On Purpose Person. It was like recommended to me by an old boss, but it kind of described this similar process for you. And it wasn't a couple thing. It was like how to think about your life and kind of create like a mission statement and a vision statement, and like how go about sort of like a businessy plan thing with a vision board and stuff. But it sounds almost similar. And I actually end up doing that like every couple years as like a reset on where do I want to head. And I have for a long time thought like, oh, that would be kind of cool to do with my partner and see like, are there ways that our goals are aligned, or how do we want to think about our goals collaboratively? So that sounds like a lot of fun actually to do.
It really is. I love the couples that every time I get a new clients coming in, or repeat clients, because sometimes, they're good, they're on their own, as got them out the door. And then something will happen. Usually it's when there's some transition, they just had a baby, or all the kids are gone, or a new job. And then they'll come back in for booster sessions. And, we do 2 or 3 sessions. They create an addendum to their business plan, and then they're off and running. And I get so excited to work with individuals so that they have these really strategic plans. And I love the ones that come in saying, we chose you because we've tried couples therapy and it didn't work for us. And you and I both know therapy doesn't work because it wasn't the right match or the right therapeutic approach. But for a lot of people, they just shut down. They're like, nope, therapy is not for me. And for those people, or when they're in a couple and one member of the partnership is really hesitant, this gives them an alternative. And I always like giving people options.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. And I also like that there are these regular reviews that take place.
And I love just what you said earlier about that book, the purposeful, or the on purpose person. You mentioned a mission statement, and it made me crack up, because that's actually the very first thing I do with all couples is we talk about, do you have mission statements at work? And of course they can tell me they do, and the why, it gives a focus and keeps people unified. And then my stinger question is, do you have it? So what's your relationship mission statement? And I have yet to have a couple say, well, here it is. They look at me and they're like, usually it's, we don't have one. And I'll say, but why? Because your company thinks it's important enough and you see the value. Why don't you have it in your relationship? And they're like, I don't know. Why don't we have one in our relationship? And so they get to create one, and all the benefits of a professional mission statement apply to their relationship, and it becomes such a dynamic tool to evaluate what they're doing and decisions they're making individually or collectively. And I love watching that.
I can just see how this would have such a big impact on so many areas. Like oftentimes I hear couples tell me like, well, we're not on the same page. They don't, and if they don't feel on the same page, I know I'm bringing up feelings. So I'm in the world of emotion. So, but they don't feel on the same page, and that is a way to get on the same page, is to have that business plan. And I was thinking, you had mentioned decision making and money. I'm thinking about money. Money is one of the top conflicts that couples often have. Wow, what a way to be able to make decisions about money if we have a plan that we've come up with together, that we're saying these are the priorities, this is where we're headed. It makes the decisions around money or choices like that so much easier.
Yep. I've addressed that specific topic again a lot with couples, as you noted. It's
Mhm.
often a pain point. And for some of my couples, I remember they created a protocol of how they make a financial decision. Some couples actually create a visual flow chart because that's what works for them in their professional
Yeah.
lives. So they have a flow chart that they will build into their plan. So it's always accessible to both members. And and then the last strategy is they create in business, it's called an ideal client avatar or customer avatar,
Uh-huh.
where you know who you're targeting. Well, in this case, I take out the C and I'm like, you're creating an ideal avatar of what it looks like in terms of your finances. And then every decision comes back to, does it fit the avatar? So it depends on, again, what the couple can gravitate to. But I love that they when they talk about money issues, I'm like, all right, tell me how you do make these kind of financial decisions at work, in your business or in your company. What does it look like? How do you budget at work? And as soon as they can articulate, well, we do it this way or this way, I'm like, okay, could you do it that way in your relationship? And then those three examples, typically it's one of those three, since they're typically used in business. So
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very cool. I could see the benefits that that would have for couples, um, like not only in just being on the same page, but in the prevention of
right.
problems or
Yeah.
or conflict. And I was thinking it makes sense how that is different than marriage counseling because it is so forward focused, but I also have to have enough, I guess I'm thinking like emotional regulation. Like I have to be able to put emotions on pause a little bit to
Yes.
have conversations like that.
Right.
And I think, you were talking about those crisis moments that couples come in with, and when I'm in a crisis, I don't have the ability to pause my emotions. My
Exactly.
emotions are sort of um, very raw, very
Right.
sensitive, and coming
Right.
out. And that's where that would be. I would see that being hard. It would be hard then to
Right.
have a conversation like that
Yes.
when
Yeah.
the
You have to
emotions are so strong.
I mean, I've dealt with couples who are frustrated with each other, and sometimes it looks like anger, and that's where, I tend to like pull them back into their, so at work, when you're frustrated with someone, do you let the anger come out,
Yeah.
or how do you regulate it? And they, again, I have seen
Oh, yeah.
and male and female clients, as soon as I get them to shift their thinking to their professional lives, the emotion drops away, whether it was because they were crying or about to get angry, but you get their brain to shift, and all of a sudden they're back in that professional mode, and now they can talk about it, and then I get them to reapply it. So it you're right. I love that I have the education to be able to know when a couple is not ready for coaching
Yeah.
and they need the referral. And I've had couples where they've come in, and sometimes an infidelity comes out in the first couple sessions that either wasn't revealed to me or wasn't revealed in the relationship, and that's where everything stops, because that has to come first. But for couples who are in a rut, just not as happy or satisfied, or
Hmm.
some of my couples are also starting a commitment and they don't want to make mistakes
Yes.
that they made in the past. So they want a better plan because they didn't have a plan in the
Oh
past.
my gosh.
I love that.
I wish every couple would go through your program as like as their premarital thing.
Right.
Yes, I'm a big fan of premarital counseling. So
Absolutely.
to do this sort of thing,
Right.
to get in sync from the beginning on
Right.
all these different factors that go into sharing your life with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's funny, isn't it? Because when we think about how much time and money we spend, most couples spend
Hmm.
planning a wedding, for a 5 to 6 hour event. In America, it's about 250 hours that they plan, and they spend
Wow.
$25,000. And then I'll ask a couple, well, how much time and money did you put into planning the marriage, the decades long marriage? And again, there might be like, well, we've had some we know we want kids eventually. I'm like, not, those are wishes. And
Hmm.
again, in business, we would never create a business around a wish and a hope. We have a plan. And yet so much time is spent on the ceremony and not the actual commitment. And
Yeah.
it's sadly funny to me, but
Yes, I can really relate to that feeling and understand that. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I'm thinking about the people who are listening to this podcast
Mhm.
are military couples
Yes.
predominantly. And, I'm thinking like the service members are probably really going to jive with everything that you're saying. It's going to fit very well with how military life functions.
Right.
We have this strategic plan. We're all on the same page. Let's go implement it. Let's come back and debrief. Like when I hear my husband talk about his work, I'm like, this is gonna be the this is gonna be something he'd love. Yeah. And I'm thinking about that, and I'm also thinking about um like things that they might say like how would we do this with a deployment, or
Mhm.
how would we do this when there are big chunks of time that I'm not going to see my partner.
Mhm.
um, I don't know if you have any thoughts or tips for how military couples might try to navigate something like this when they have, yeah, when they have deployments or they have very unpredictable schedules or
Mhm.
sort of that type of thing.
Right. I've worked with a couple, more than a couple military families, and it isn't that different because it comes down to the planning. So if they're lucky enough to have advance notice of a deployment, then certainly utilizing that time to create the plan of
Mhm.
what the communication is going to look like. What's the plan B when communication isn't as easy due to whatever circumstances? Like, how do we ensure that there is a plan, a backup plan, and then a secondary backup plan, which
Mhm.
again, as you noted, was the military family members and actual active service people, they jive with it because that's how they function. So it's like
Mhm.
we're talking the same language. If there isn't that advanced luxury, then it's making sure that there's always that the bug out bag basically, but this is their bug out plan. Like, okay, if I have to go in 2 hours notice, we don't have time to sit down and make a plan. And so what is the plan that we're just going to pull out of the drawer? And that's going to be the active plan at the moment because we don't have time to do
Mhm.
in moment planning. And again, I see that my experience has been that it creates a level of comfort and security, knowing, okay, we either have a plan if there's no time, and we have a plan when there is time, and we can borrow from each. But a lot of it is around communication, and then I do love that in regards specific to the military families, then they also have a plan for when they come back, when they
Oh,
are
that's so
activating that.
lovely.
Yes, because that's important,
Yeah.
and it's important for both members. It's important for the one that was back at home taking care of everything, not just assuming that the other person's going to be able to just dive right in and pick up where they left off, that they might have to be retrained, that things might have changed, especially for longer deployments.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's for the other person, the active military who comes back to know, okay, yeah, we can work with a 3 week, reentry process and easing you back in. And what are the things that, as of right now, you think will be important to support you as you come back in? And gosh, if it involved any kind of um uh fighting situation, I forget the actual military term, but then that's even more important. So
Mhm.
it's having that plan already in place so that it's not something that has to be done when they come back. It's just there, and it's just going to be instituted as soon as they step off that plane and have the first phone call home. And I love the reassurance. Anytime I can support it, anytime I can support people that do so much to support all of
Mhm.
us, oh my goodness, that's where I'm
Yeah.
like, that's an honor. That's not even my job. So
Yeah. Yeah. I can understand that. I can hear I'm so emotionally based. I can like hear it in your voice right now, even as you're talking.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Military and first responders. I don't know how old I have to get to be able to, say that they go the places none of us would dream of going or wanting to go. Like, I just
yeah.
can't even, with all my training and experience, I cannot quite get to that level of how do you do that? And if
Yeah.
I can help them because of what I know how to do, then again, it is just truly an honor at that point. So,
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah. Um, I loved the idea of a coming home plan too,
mm,
because I'm thinking like, if you don't have that plan, then we're really not on the same page. Like, I can
Right.
even think when my husband came back from the first time he was gone, he came back and I was mad at him. And
Right.
I was like, how, like, I was so excited up until the point that
Right.
I saw him, and then I saw him and I was just mad that he had
Mhm.
ever left. And
Right.
and of course I got over that kind of quickly, but it threw us both off.
Yes.
And then I would want to do things and he would just want to relax.
Yep.
And so not having a clear idea of like, how are we going to get back on the same page together? What do you need to transition? I can see that being really valuable, because I've also heard other military couples talk about that too, that sort of tension,
Mhm.
tension that comes with, um, we have different longings, different
Yeah.
desires in that initial phase of getting resituated together.
For a lot of couples, military couples specifically, a debrief is really an
Mm,
important part of their business plan for when they're rejoined. And the debrief, typically, I typically recommend that they wait at least 2 weeks to get to implement the plan, give those 2 weeks, and then debrief anywhere 2 to 4 weeks. I don't like it. I don't recommend it go longer than 4 weeks, but to say,
yeah.
okay, what's been working, what is not working, what plans and protocols can we put around the things that aren't working. So it's not just that we're just assuming, again, feel like things are good, or things don't feel good or like they are good. It's what are our KPIs around evaluating? Are things really good? Are we imagining it? Are we hoping for it?
Hmm.
Or do we actually have data that things are going according to the plan? And if there's anything that's not, now it gives the couple an opportunity to create a new addendum to the plan
Hmm.
instead of just trying to make a plan that's not working work. Like so many of us do that as humans, as you
Yeah.
know, like we have a plan, we have a routine, but if it's not working, then let's adjust. So I think the debrief is a really important step. That if the couple doesn't think of it on their own, then I suggest it, because I don't think just to keep going without some check-in is valuable.
Yeah. Sort of like sometimes plans change. Like, you make your best plan, but
Right,
then what if
right,
some things come up? Life happens that,
right.
you don't want to keep doing the same thing when it
Yeah.
might need to be modified.
And what changed at home during, whether it's a
Mhm.
month deployment, whether it's a 2 year deployment, what changed at home that now that original plan, it doesn't apply anymore? Or what changed for that active military while they were gone that no, that now they need some or want some different things? That's
Mhm.
what the debrief does, is just not assuming, hey, we said this, so it must be what we're doing. It gives them a chance to
Oh,
actually have a scheduled talk. And I actually, when there is time to plan before a deployment, I I encourage the couple to put it on the calendar if they have a general. Of course, military,
yeah.
you have to be a little bit flexible, but if they have a general idea, or as the deployment is coming to an end, they have a more secure idea. Get the debriefing on the calendar before they're even home, so that
Mhm.
and if it has to adjust, it adjusts, but it's there. Because if it's on the calendar, it happens. You and I
Yes.
both know if it's not on
Yeah.
your calendar, it doesn't happen.
Yeah. Very, even that is business-like. Put
Yeah,
it, schedule it. If it's
exactly.
on the calendar, I'll show up. Yeah.
Yep. I
Yeah.
I I cannot tell you. I could tell you the conversations I have with couples. I bring them back to you. I'm like, on your work calendar, what's on your work calendar? And they'll list it off. I'm like, so everything you want to make sure happens, because it'll make some level of success for whatever the overall goal is. Yes. Okay. What's on your personal calendar? And I truly believe, as a couples coach, everything should be on a couple's shared private calendar. And that
Hmm.
includes physical connection time. So I've worked with couples where I'm like, if they're dissatisfied with their sex life, put it on your calendar. And they're all, and of course, they're like, no, Robin, it shouldn't be like that. It should be spontaneous and in the moment. I'm like, great. How's that working for you? Like,
Uh-huh.
if it's not working, then put it on the calendar until it becomes just a part of your regular existence. Or maybe it never does, and you just leave it on the calendar, and then it'll happen. And that's
Yeah.
wonderful.
It's it's kind of letting go of the fairy tale in order to switch to the business model. Like we want a healthy business. We want a healthy, thriving business. I'm going to use that sort of like business model, but it's so different than the fairy tale of where or like the romance movie where things just happen naturally and we have all of this gushing positive
Right.
emotions all the
Yeah.
time.
And the way I usually phrase it, Liz, is and I've used fairy tale before, is that you create the business plan so you can have the fairy tale. You create the foundation so that all the bells and whistles of emotion and sexual connection and love, they just get enhanced. But if you're hoping and praying that the marriage will be secure enough with no plan that love and sexual attraction are going to maintain, just look at the divorce rates. And
Yeah.
that the societal expectation of that you have a commitment and it's just going to stay that way because you said the words. Again, in business, we would never rely on just words. We would have a plan.
I'm just thinking about the time. So I'm really so glad that you were on this podcast. Do you have any last thoughts or final words of advice for military couples?
Yeah, for every couple, and especially the military. If you do nothing else, if you take away nothing else from this podcast, just create a mission statement with your partner. It not only is it a lovely date to talk about where you want to get to in the future and how you're going to do that together, but it truly can become a tool that for every decision and every behavior, you can use it as an evaluating tool to say, does this support the mission? Does this support where we're going to? So if nothing else, that's what I recommend for all couples. But I think military can really, really gravitate to that well.
Yeah, I like that. Well, I think I would be super supportive of people working with coaches. I've not come across couples coaches before. You're the first one. But you gave us like the framework of how do we know who to look for, who to trust, who might be able to help us with our marriage, how to think about who was a marriage like when a marriage counselor could help versus a coach could help. So could you tell people like how they could work with you if they wanted to?
Absolutely. And whether it's working with me or asking questions, I'm always happy to be a resource. So my website is Dr. Robin Buckley, all one word, no periods, abbreviated doctor. And I'm also on a lot of social media. So you can find me on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. We'll see how long Twitter's around. And then my wonderful older teenage kids convinced me to go on TikTok, but they very clearly are not happy with my choice because as they say, your videos are boring, Mom. You're just talking. I'm like, right. I'm there to help people, not dance. So
I have not tried TikTok yet.
I'm coming to it, but it actually started because of my TED Talk and that got on TikTok. So, or at least segments of it. So I was like, all right, I'm already there. I might as well just keep going.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll include links to your website in the show notes. So that way it's easy for people to find. But yeah, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Liz, thank you so much. This was a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, please take a second to go rate, review, and subscribe so you get all of our future episodes. Make sure to check out the show notes to sign up for our free 10-week relationship email course. This email course is really designed for people who are maybe having trouble with communication or connection in their relationship and helping them develop some quick wins right away to start improving it. While I am a therapist, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not considered therapy. And it should also not be a replacement for therapy. If you think you need a professional of any kind, you should definitely go find one. Until next time.